After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the imagery analysis, learn about the technique and facial morphology. The practical methods of facial recognition and imagery analysis used in support of the judicial system. Imagery is a generic term for pictures or images. It is comprised of wavefronts of reflected or the emitted energy captured by a camera, and therefore it embraces photographs, television and infrared pictures as well as the radar photography. Recently, the use of CCTV for security purposes has led to a substantial increase in the use of imagery in support of the investigation of crime and the analysis. And such analysis is essential for, among other uses, in facial recognition and identification. Recognition or identification is most often achieved by facial comparison when the imagery of an offender is compared systematically with that of a person suspected of an offense. Facial comparison from imagery is often called facial mapping. This name is perhaps a little misleading and facial comparison is probably more apt. However, facial mapping has now become an accepted term for the purposes used by imagery analysts who compare faces captured on the imagery and comment on their similarity or dissimilarity. As has been told by me already, the imagery analysts are normally asked to compare imagery of an offender or offenders with imagery of the person or persons committing an offense, although this may not be confined to imagery of the face alone. Even though they are the most important elements in recognition and identification, facial features are not the only factor. Height, build, posture and gait patterns are the other features that the human mind will seek out when attempting to distinguish another person. Many imagery analysts differentiate between recognition and identification in their work. Identification occurs when there is no doubt that person A is one and the same as person B. Such positive identification is only achieved if there is a unique identification mark, example a scar or mole, or if the similarities are sufficiently numerous so as to be overwhelming. Recognition occurs when there are similarities to the extent that someone who knows a person well or has studied imagery of that person in detail believes it is possible that the subjects under comparison are one and the same. Recognition might have some probative value but normally only as a support to other evidences. Identification, on the other hand, might stand as a proof in its own right. The need for properly trained and experienced forensic imagery analyst is underlined by the phenomenon which is sometimes called as cognitive preconception. An untrained eye will anticipate that an accused individual and the offender are likely to be the same person and hence subconsciously form the impression that this is a fact. Few people like to be wrong and thus their minds have a tendency to look for features on the imagery so as to prove that they are correct or they were correct and to discount clues that suggest otherwise. In other words, they make the facts fit the case. Next, we will move on to the topic of imagery analysis. Imagery is the only permanent record of what actually happened during an event, and therefore it is very important that imagery evidence wherever possible, is made available to the court. The camera never lies. It merely records what it sees. But this is only useful if imagery recorded is properly and correctly interpreted. There have been several studies made to determine the capability of persons to correctly identify suspects or subjects on the imagery. All have concluded that it is not a simple matter and errors are common, but none have been able to produce reliable statistics on the percentage of errors made. So far, there have been no tests using the trained and experienced imagery analyst, and as their numbers are very few, such tests would be statistically insignificant. What is indisputable is that lay observers can easily be misled. For example, a professional cameraman using a combination of unusual angles or harsh lighting could record a photograph of a man in such a way that even his next of kin would fail to recognize him. Nonetheless, the photograph is still a true image of that individual or man. Properly qualified and experienced imagery analysts are able to understand how such a picture is recorded and therefore are able to interpret the imagery correctly. They take into account the specifications of the recording system, the nature of the lighting, the angular field of view of the camera, and the impact of shape, shadow, size, tone, and associated features. Thus, it is important that courts of law insist that the evidence be presented by expert imagery analysts in order to minimize the risk of incorrect interpretations, leading to an unsafe conclusion. Forensic imagery analysis, like all forensic work, needs to be completed with utmost care and for detail, as the penalty for not doing so is severe. Imagery quality and enhancement. A great deal of imagery made available in forensic work is of the medium to poor quality. Surprisingly, this has little to do with the quality of the cameras. Most CCTV monitors show pictures that are mainly clear and unambiguous. Why then is the quality of the imagery recorded onto tapes so different? The answer lies in a combination of poor recording systems and the management of these systems. The situation is very improving as more and more digital systems replace the older VHS recorders. Frequently, VHS tapes are used, wiped, and then used again many times with consequent progressive loss of magnetic material. Many users place the video cameras too far away from the likely human target so as to obtain sufficient facial detail. Moreover, advertising boards and other obstructions are frequently placed in front of the camera, blocking its view. All these aspects, plus the incorrect positioning of the tilting data on the imagery frame, lead to reductions in the usefulness of the imagery and difficulties for imagery analysis. Now we will discuss about the technique. How this is done. Many techniques have been developed during the drive to achieve safe and reliable facial mapping. They have a variety of names, but all are covered by the general headings. These techniques are designed to accomplish the same thing, that is, namely to try to eliminate the suspect, and hence they are focused on looking for the significant differences required. The order in which the techniques are applied varies. Some analysts prefer to use photogrammetry or superimposition in a first attempt to eliminate the suspect, and the basis for their method is that a clear difference in size is sufficient for their study. For example, if the distances between the exocanthus on the left eye and the exocanthions on the right eye are significantly different, then they are not the same person. However, care must be exercised normally. Pictures of the accused and the offender are derived from different cameras using different recording media. Consequently, there is a distinct requirement for accurate photogrammetry before a safe result can be achieved or obtained. The initial morphology study is not designed so as to come to any immediate conclusion or any specific conclusion, as this might result in cognitive preconception, as has been told earlier also, but it provides an overall impression of the two faces and enables analysts to note any clear and possibly unique blemishes such as moles and scars. Next is facial morphology. As with any comparison, it is necessary to compare like with like, as has been the general principle of forensic science, that is, like is to be compared with like only. Thus, it is essential to identify images of the accused and of the offender that are the same in terms of the angular field of view. The first action is to study carefully the facial features or the facial morphology so as to see if there is any obvious difference. These must be profound, like a marked difference in the shape of the nose, the eyes or the ears, and should be verifiable, if possible, in all of the comparison images. It is insufficient to accept that the persons under comparison will simply look different, because differences may be caused by aging, lighting, clever disguise or makeup, as well as the transitory differences such as changes in hairstyle. If no clear and obvious differences are identified, the next stage is to compare carefully each visible facial landmark on as many images as possible or as many images that has been obtained. In conjunction with the observation of the landmarks, the imagery analyst must consider the underlying muscles of the face, which are foremost in determining the expressions of the face of an individual. Further information can also be obtained from the books such as the Anthropometry of the Head and Face, written by Farkas and others, wherein Farkas in 1994. This study is one of the several standards for forensic imagery analysis. Morphological examination is performed carefully from, for example, the apex of the head and down to the neck. The landmarks serve as a guide to look into the detail at all major features and in turn are considered from every angle provided by the imagery of the offender and the accused. The shape of the feature, the shadow cast and the size in proportion to other features are also noted, and a conclusion is drawn based on that as to whether or not there are significant differences. If there are no significant differences, the similarity is noted and will be subjected to subsequent photogrammetric testing. In addition to contributing strongly to expressiveness, some of these may be more developed in some faces than in others, and thus giving rise to an altercation in the facial shape at particular points. These muscles can change size with age, adding in some cases another complicating variable. Now we will study about the superimposition of tracing. Starting with the first have flicker and change detection. To identify differences, analysts use computer systems to alternate between the two pictures. If this is done rapidly, the differences flash or the flicker to observer, that is, first they are there and then they are not there and then they are there and so on. Another method to pinpoint differences is to use software to reveal differences, also known as change detection. In this method, The computer will only show differences between the two pictures and can, for example, paint these differences in a contrasting color. Differences highlighted in this way can be studied in detail so as to determine if they are significant or not. Next is wiping. Image technology is developing rapidly so as to allow useful techniques to enhance the interpretability of imagery or the image analysis. For example, two pictures can be wiped off electronically across the other, showing slowly, line by line, the similarities or importantly the differences between them. This is of course impossible to illustrate in an unanimated way. The wipes can be horizontal, vertical or even diagonal across the pictures and are useful to analysts, but care must be taken before they are accepted as evidence in the court of law and before a jury, as like all such animations they are powerful and it is easy for the mind to be fooled easily. A moving video picture is more easily interpreted than a selection of singles or stills taken from it. The stills reveal all the distortions and aberrations, whereas the brain discounts this detail when it watches the moving picture. Next, here is the matching. It is sometimes useful for analysts to place the right half of a face against the left half of a face under comparison or vice versa, so as to determine if they match within reason. Once again, care must be taken in drawing conclusions. Human faces are seldom completely symmetrical and hence the geometric center is difficult to identify, but it is a technique which draws attention to anomalies, particularly on poor pictures, and may help to detect a meaningful difference between those two persons or individuals. Next are the other features that we will see. As has been already told by me, the facial features are not the only factors that can help determine the identification. There may be many other factors including the comparison of height, build, gait, posture and mannerisms, as well as matching clothing or accoutrements seized on arrest with the articles worn or used by the offender. Only when all these factors are noted and taken into account should any conclusion be drawn or reached. It is seldom that a forensic imagery analyst will be able to provide a positive identification that would stand in its own right as a proof in court. But the importance of imagery evidence should not be underestimated, as it is above all a permanent record of an event. The camera does not lie, although it might mislead many laypersons into incorrect interpretations or approximations. Hence, the qualified and experienced imagery analysts are needed for forensic purposes so as to aid the court in its deliberations. Forensic imagery analysts have been reluctant to commit to defining in the mathematical terms the strength of their conclusions. This is not from doubt about their own judgments, but to ensure that the court is not misled. For example, a sureness of say 75% is very positive to some, but not to others who would see it as a 25% doubt. Many analysts feel that it is up to the jury to take their evidence and place upon it what reliance they judge to be correct when balanced against all the evidence they have heard. However, many courts require some understanding of the strength of the imagery evidence opinion, and to this end a table has been agreed upon by the Forensic Imagery Analysis Group or FIAG. A number of individuals and groups have become practitioners in this field in the past decade so as to satisfy the demand for imagery analysis and facial mapping. But the standard has been seen by the courts as variable, and hence the reliability of forensic imagery analysis in general has been a subject of criticism. Now let us summarize this module. Imagery is a generic term for pictures. It comprises of wavefronts of reflected or emitted energy captured by a camera system and recorded by film, magnetic media, optical disc and other medias. Therefore, it embraces the photographs, television and infrared pictures as well as the radar photography. Imagery is the only permanent record of what actually happened during an event, and therefore it is very important that imagery evidence wherever possible is made available to the court. A great deal of imagery made available in forensic work is of the medium to poor quality. And surprisingly, this has little to do with the quality of the cameras. Most CCTV monitors show pictures that are mainly clear and unambiguous. The initial morphology study is not designed to come to an immediate conclusion, as this might result in cognitive preconception, as has been told earlier also, but it provides an overall impression of the two faces and enables analysts to note any clear and possibly unique blemishes, examples the moles and scars. If there are no significant differences, the similarity is noted and will be subjected to subsequent photogrammetric testing. In addition to contributing strongly to expressiveness, some of these may be more developed in some faces rather than in others, giving rise to an alteration in the facial shape at particular points.